Hello and welcome to Melbourne Conversations, Urban Heat Islands. Great to have you with us. This event is part of the Melbourne Conversations series run by the City of Melbourne on the third Wednesday of every month. My name's Callie Colston. I'm a broadcaster and editor with long involvement in promoting sustainability in our built environments, and I am your host this lunchtime. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And before we get started, in the spirit of reconciliation, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country where I am today, the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation. And this is a City of Melbourne event. On their behalf, I always also pay respects to the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong elders past and present, and extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. Today's focus on the urban heat island effect couldn't be more topical or important, not just for those of us working to improve the health and sustainability of urban areas, but to the people, animals and insects that call cities home. Urban heat island is where cities feel hotter due to the prevalence of concrete glass. It's also an issue that goes to the heart of what makes cities livable. We have an absolutely fabulous panel today who's going to help us to better understand how cities around the world are offsetting this heat. They'll also introduce us to initiatives already underway, including solutions and strategies being pursued right here in Melbourne. We'll be taking audience questions as part of the Q&A. You can submit your questions throughout the event and we'll answer as many as we can towards the end of the hour we've got together. To do this, to submit your question, you can go to the Slido. It's the sli.do and enter the hashtag Urban Heat Islands. And you can also subscribe to this Melbourne Knowledge Week YouTube channel to stay up to date with Melbourne Conversations events. Over the next hour, you'll hear from three speakers. Associate Professor Jo Hurley is a researcher in the Centre for Urban Research and a lecturer in sustainability and urban planning at RMIT University. Candice Jordan is the climate change adaptation lead at the City of Melbourne, and Priya Rajagopalan is professor and the director of the Sustainable Building Innovation Lab as part of the School of Property, Construction and Project Management at RMIT University. We'll be hearing some introductory remarks from each of the panel first before we have a broader conversation, which we hope you'll be participating in too. So let's get started and meet our first speaker, Associate Professor Jo Hurley from the Centre for Urban Research. Jo's research focuses on the intersection between urban planning and urban sustainability. His research on urban greening and cooling has revealed the extent of urban vegetation cover and cover loss in major Australian cities and is helping to inform policy, strategy and programs to protect and enhance the urban forest. Jo, take it away.
Thanks very much for that introduction, Kalia. It's great to be here. So what I'm going to do in a few minutes is just set the scene for today's panel to talk about the urban heat island effect and the need to cool and green our cities in response. So what is the urban heat island effect? Well, put simply, it's the increase in temperature experienced in urban areas compared to surrounding areas during periods of high heat. So it's that build-up and retention of heat in cities. Cities are full of materials that absorb and retain heat, our roads, buildings, hard infrastructure. This increases temperatures during the day and maintains those increases overnight as heat is released from all that thermal mass. So this can result in average temperatures of between 4 and 10 degrees hotter than surrounding non-urban areas during heat waves. So why is this a problem? Well, I'm sure most of you tuning in today see that as pretty obviously a big problem. It makes city life really uncomfortable. It can have huge economic implications through energy consumption, reduced productivity. It has severe impacts on health and well-being, limiting physical activity, exacerbating health conditions. In terms of natural disasters, heat waves are actually the #1 cause of death in Australia. The impacts of heat are also felt more severely by disadvantaged populations who have limited resources to adapt. So it's a really pressing problem for our cities. Well, what can be done about the urban heat island effect? Kalia introduced this briefly. There's lots that can be done, and we'll be hearing about that from panellists today. Lots that can be done, and increasingly lots that is being done. We have extensive understanding of ways to cool urban environments, and there's new knowledge, new approaches, and new technologies emerging every day. Yet I think it's fair to say we are not yet doing a good enough job on prioritising such actions in an integrated way to better manage our cities. So my research looks particularly at the role of the urban forest, or the trees and vegetation, that collective role they play in cooling our cities, amongst many other benefits. A healthy and abundant urban forest can basically counter the impacts of the urban heat island effect. So it can almost eliminate that 4 to 10 degree increase, cooling buildings, providing cool streets and refuges in cities. But too often we take our urban trees and vegetation for granted. And our research shows that in many areas of Australian cities, we are losing many more trees than are being planted. Our research on local government activity across Australia shows that action is increasing to try and improve vegetation cover to arrest that loss and provide new trees, particularly in managing public land. So here we can think about streetscapes and parks, for example. However, about half of all urban vegetation is on private land, and on average, almost all the loss we see is on private land, on these residential lots in particular. This is due to the decisions of individual residents in the way they manage their land, and also occurs during the redevelopment process. So the cumulative impact of the many decisions to remove trees results in a devastating impact on this critical collective infrastructure that is the urban forest. So my pitch today, if you like, which you can pick up on in conversation, is for the urban forest to be viewed and managed as a critical infrastructure of cities, alongside other infrastructures of roads and pipes and wires and buildings that frequently come in conflict with vegetation and trees. There are many conflicts we need to resolve in managing our cities. We need to prioritise green infrastructure, the urban forest, alongside these other infrastructures to ensure that we don't have a systematic erosion of our urban forest over time. Thanks for that chance to have some introductory remarks. Kalia, it's back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we will dig into some of the points that you just raised there, particularly around managing vegetation on private and public lands, and also hearing about what's been done at the local government level, and that there's a lot happening is fantastic. And you know that, including at the City of Melbourne. And so that takes us to our next speaker, Candice Jordan, who is the Climate Change Adaptation Lead at the City of Melbourne. Candice has been working as a climate change adaptation practitioner for over 10 years across state and local levels of government, and she's been involved in the development and implementation of City of Melbourne's climate change adaptation strategy refresh in 2017, with a particular focus on mitigating urban heat and monitoring and evaluating the city's adaptation strategy. There's a lot to do, I'm sure. Candice is going to bring us right up to date with what's happening on the ground in Melbourne. The floor is yours, Candice.
Thanks, Kalia, and hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. So I'll briefly just touch on, I suppose, some of our approaches, but also thinking about ways that we're looking at how we can prioritise our investment and help cool the city as well. So like Joe discussed, greening, urban forest, other green infrastructure, as well as our integrated water management infrastructure, are all effective ways to reduce urban heat island effect. And that's something that the City of Melbourne over the last decade has put a lot of investment into to help cool the city. But something that we're started to investigate a bit more to help build that evidence base and support that investment is trying to understand how effective these interventions are. So then, we can really use that to prioritise future investment, really with a focus on how we can reduce the risks to our community as well as the assets and services that council provides. So having said that, having data, the right data to support our decision making is really crucial, to make sure that we're implementing the right actions and in the right locations, and particularly where our most vulnerable communities live. So at City of Melbourne, we want to be a data-driven organisation to make sure that we are achieving the best possible outcomes for our community and meeting their needs as well. So over the last couple of years, we've started to install sensors to collect microclimate data to better understand heat and thermal comfort across the city. So really starting to think about human thermal comfort and how spaces and the temperature in those spaces can impact people. So the sensors measure air temperature, wind speed, humidity, which are all meteorological factors that impact the thermal comfort of an outdoor space. To date, we've installed them in various streetscapes, so looking at exposed asphalt sites to sites that have poor quality canopy cover to good, healthy quality canopy cover. Also looking at shade structures in the form of awnings and seeing how that impacts the temperature and thermal comfort of a space. And also starting to look at different built forms and building densities in place and that sort of radiated temperature and how that impacts the comfort of spaces as well. So yeah, by capturing the localized data, we can understand better what the specific cooling interventions, such as tree canopy, shading, lighter coloured paving, has on temperatures and thermal comfort, and which are most effective at reducing those temperatures to improve the comfort and safety for people. And the research we've done to date shows, it backs up our assumptions in the literature, what the literature says about tree canopy cover being the most effective measure to reduce temperature. And we're finding that on those really extreme heat days of 35 plus, that good quality canopy cover can decrease the temperature by 2 to 5 degrees in some locations, which when it comes to reducing the health risks that people can be exposed to, that 2 to 5 degrees is a really, really crucial reduction. And we've also seen that those sites that are exposed are much hotter, particularly as some of the heat health initiatives that council undertakes as well. So yeah, as I said, this information can help provide city planners and city users with a more accurate understanding of urban microclimate, and yeah, help us identify the appropriate interventions that we put in place, especially in different urban settings. It could be a combination of paving design, of water for cooling, of vegetation, of shade structures. So it's really about helping us design and construct more climate resilient spaces and assets as well. And something else that we've started to explore is with further heat mapping and microclimate data, the more we collect, we can then overlay that with socioeconomic data, and that can help prioritise where we invest in interventions as well. So really identifying those hotspots for the community where the most vulnerable live and work, and making sure that we're designing refuges and spaces that they can go to get away from the heat, but also help inform other tools and resources and information that we can provide them to stay cool in the heat. I'll finish up there, but I'll just also note that if anyone's interested in seeing our microclimate data, we have it available on our open data platform. So I'd encourage people to check it out and download it and explore it if they've got an interest in that. And I'll hand back to you, Kalia. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much. And look, there's data nerds everywhere, but you don't have to be one to be interested in that sort of information. It's fabulous that it's been collected, Candice. And your presentation certainly got me thinking, especially with regards to what the data can do for us. I mean, if you just joined us, my name is Kalia Colston and you're watching Melbourne Conversations Urban Heat Islands. We're part of the Melbourne Conversations series run by the City of Melbourne on the third Wednesday of every month. You can submit your question to join our discussion. I've certainly got a whole lot in my mind that I'm very much looking forward to putting to our panel. We'll endeavour to get to yours towards the end of our discussion. So feel free to submit them by going to sly.do and entering hashtag Urban Heat Islands. And we can see those. Our moderation team will bring them to our attention. Looking forward to hearing what you want to hear more about. But before we open up for that broader discussion, let's hear from our third speaker. Priya Rajagopalan is a building scientist with extensive experience in energy and indoor environmental quality of buildings, urban climatology and urban thermal balance. She is a professor and the director of the Sustainable Building Innovation Lab at the School of Property Construction and Project Management at RMIT University. And she's also president of the Architectural Science Association. She's published more than 100 scientific papers and coordinated several projects in the area of urban heat island, energy benchmarking and the labelling of buildings, as well as indoor air quality in the tropical and temperate climates. And Priya, we are in your expert hands. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kanya, and thank you everyone for joining today and listening to this Melbourne conversations on urban health. I have a few slides just to navigate my thought process, and today I'll be talking about urban heat island and how the built environment is responding. We have heard from Joe and Candace about the background, the fundamentals of urban heat island and what the city of Melbourne is actually doing. And let's see what the built environment is currently responding to that. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, so what we see here is a distribution of cooling load. And before that, one of the most significant problem caused by urban heat island is the energy and how this is going to affect the cooling load, the peak cooling, and the demand of by the energy grid. And this is the cooling load of the reference office building in Sydney. As we know, most of the major cities in Australia are developed next to the sea and benefit from the cooling characteristic of sea breeze. However, when you go further inland, the temperatures are much higher, mainly due to the impact of the Australian desert. For example, during hot days, summer period, Sydney's western suburbs can be as hot as 9 degrees Celsius compared to the eastern suburbs, which are closer to the coastal areas. So what this picture actually shows is the cooling load of a reference office building in Sydney, and the cooling load can be as much as double that of the cooling load of the coastal area. And this is just a 50 kilometers apart. And think about the further urbanization, how this is going to impact the whole energy grid and the thermal comfort of people. Next slide, please. So extreme heat can be fatal for vulnerable people. The impact of summertime overheating on new build and existing as well as retrofitted domestic building stock is the growing public health issue across the world. And for example, during the 2008 and 2009 heat waves in Adelaide, the cardiac-related ambulance callouts were significantly higher. And what you will see here is, the people who are most affected are vulnerable people, including those old, young, and those with chronic illnesses. And people have a misunderstanding that those who live in the tropical don't really get affected by urban heat island because it's cool here. But the temperature threshold where heat-related deaths begin to occur during a heat wave is much lower in temperate climates. And also exposure to heat wave much earlier in the season, like what we have been seeing an early summer, has greater impact on mortality because people are not really had a chance to adapt to higher temperatures yet. Next slide, please. So we have most of the existing residential buildings have a very limited adaptive capacity. There are, as we all know, passive design strategies. For example, having shading, direct sunlight, natural ventilation, and building materials, insulation. They all can actually help in reducing the heat and to improve the thermal comfort. And when the conditions become worse, you can use fans and air conditioning. But the large number of low-income groups do not have access to such housing facilities. So that's the area we need to focus. Next slide, please. So there is a need to monitor, as Candace said, the Melbourne city is collecting all this data to be able to use by the people. The need to monitor indoor environmental conditions and collect empirical data is very important because most of the existing studies on heat and health, they are related to increased number of hospital admissions during heat waves. But there is a lack of study on how we can implement suitable and long-term adaptive capability approaches in homes, and also to understand the health risks of summertime heating in homes. You need detailed monitoring of human physiology in extreme conditions because almost all the studies of thermal comfort is for normal people but not really vulnerable people. Next slide, please. So what you see here are some images of citizen science approach in monitoring urban microclimate. So we have actually worked with 22 councils across last couple of years. Melbourne City Council is one of the partner, has been one of the partner. So we are actually using people power in monitoring and assisting in data collection. So importantly, through data collection and participation, the public will be empowered to respond to extreme heat through an understanding of the influential factors. Next slide, please. So we have developed a number of tools, and which can be found in our website. The address is below. And these tools can actually help citizens and local councils to identify the mitigation measures that can be applied to certain areas. This can actually include, like as Candace said, water features, high reflectance material, cool roofs, and greenery, of course, which is discussed by Joe before. And this, the one solution is not really going to fit for all the cities, because for Melbourne, because of the climate, very hot and dry, you may not want to have those kind of mitigation actions which is going to be applicable for Darwin. So there are a lot of tools which we could apply and see what is works best in that location. And finally, I just want to, next slide please. Just want to let you all know that the International Urban Heat Island Research Community is coming to Melbourne next year, and we are going to host the 6th International Conference on Countermeasures to Urban Heat Island. And the theme of this conference is about an holistic approaches to urban heat island, because we have realized there is an interdisciplinary approach required to bring together researchers from building science, social science, and health. And I just want to stop it there, and we are looking for collaboration and participation from the Melbourne community for this wonderful event. Thank you very much, Kalia. Back to you.
Thank you, Priya. And exciting that Melbourne's going to be hosting the next International Conference on Urban Heat Island, and when that happens next year. And no doubt there's a lot we can teach and learn from people around the world also grappling with this issue. And it's now time for a Q&A with our whole panel. So if you haven't already done so, please jot down your question for our panelists in the Slido, the sli.do, if you put that into your browser and enter the hashtag Urban Heat Islands, so our moderating team can bring them to our attention. I'm Carly Costin, and we're talking Urban Heat Islands as part of the Melbourne Conversations. And now I think we can see all of us together on screen. Hello, everybody. And I'll quickly introduce you all again. Associate Professor Joe Hurley, in the Centre for Urban Research. Candace Jordan is the Climate Change Adaptation Lead at the City of Melbourne, and Priya Rajagopalan is Professor and Director of the Sustainable Building Innovation Lab at RMIT. And I'll kick off with a couple of questions first. And I guess, we heard there about, the temperatures rising, some places 50 degrees in Australia, but we get heat waves in Melbourne, temperatures into the mid-40s sometimes, and which can remain really high overnight. Is this likely to be exacerbated with climate change? I'm assuming yes, but what does our future look like without intervention? You've all covered a lot of ground already, but I wonder if you could speak to how vulnerable Melbourne is to urban heat island effects, perhaps starting with you, Joe.
Yeah, look, that's a pretty scary thought, future without intervention. It basically would mean that many areas of our cities would become pretty much uninhabitable. You look at the western suburbs of Melbourne in particular, as Priya said, western suburbs of Sydney often talked about, but also areas of our other major cities, getting to the point where really not feasible for a whole range of reasons around human comfort and well-being, but also the cost of actually maintaining buildings to house businesses, all those kind of things would become unfeasible. So intervention is essential. That's not necessarily drastic intervention, but it's making sure we understand what infrastructures we need in place, like we do to run all sorts of aspects of our cities, and making sure they're there and cared for and encouraged, and increased where they need to be increased, particularly where we have high concentrations of vulnerable populations.
Yeah, and I mean, if we speak about the City of Melbourne with regards to where vulnerable populations are, is that also where we've got less tree coverage? I mean, what's your data showing us, Candace?
Yeah, I suppose in some ways the City of Melbourne is almost like a microcosm or a small representation of Greater Melbourne, where the east side of the municipality, we have a really fantastic legacy of green space, where the western part of the city is more industrial, and it's also where our urban renewal areas are located. And we find that vegetation cover and open space, there's much less in that side of the municipality than compared to the eastern side, where we have that linear corridor of parks and gardens. So yes, our information does show that, and our urban forest strategy and our open space strategy have recognised that. And so in terms of our opportunities where we're looking to expand open space or create new open space, as well as our tree planting schedule, really identifies those precincts or neighbourhoods as priorities for intervention moving forward. Because just as Jo said, in terms of the materials and the way the space is designed, that it's those places are going to get hotter, and we do find that socioeconomic wise as well, there's more vulnerable populations towards the western side and northwestern side of the municipality. So it's definitely critical for us, and we know that the downscale climate projections that have been done for Melbourne tell us that in the future it is going to get hotter. We're going to have more extreme heat days. On average at the moment we experience between 11 to 12 or so, but in the future it's going to be 16 or more above 35, and without mitigation action as well as then adaptation action, that's only likely to increase. So it's very critical that we do act now, and especially when vegetation takes years to really develop that healthy canopy cover, that it's important that we start planting now, putting interventions in place now to really avoid those future risks and costs.
Yeah, and I'd love to come back a little to the green spaces and pocket parks, and there's a whole lot of things that we've got now in cities around Melbourne. But Priya, I was thinking back to when I used to edit, magazines on sustainable homes, and one thing I noticed is that people would say, "Wow, when a house is built for the environment, it's so comfortable. I don't need to heat and cool it as much, etc., etc." But most people don't know what that feels like. They've actually never been or lived in a comfortable home. And I wonder, with your experience with the built form, whether people are even aware that living in an urban area, the heat, the thermal temperature around them is contributing to their, lessening their well-being, whether there's an awareness there, and whether that might be critical to some of the change and some of the solutions that you see.
Yeah, I think people probably not really aware, because if you have very hot days, you could either be working in the offices. But during the last COVID time, it made them realize that if the house is not that comfortable, because if it is very hot, you are not going to go anywhere. You are just stuck inside the houses. But it's very interesting, because the outside temperature have a very big impact on the air conditioning energy. At the same time, the air conditioners expose more heat outside, which is going to increase the temperatures. But what's happening is most of the energy rating systems traditionally have been focusing on the winter time comfort, and the Australian homes have been kind of overemphasized, particularly in Victoria, on making the house comfortable for during the winter season. And there is a tendency to completely make it highly insulated and well tight. But for days like 3-4 days of hot heat wave days, it's really impacted the urban thermal discomfort. And also the climate files which are being normally used for building simulations, they are also need to be updated. And when you use when you do a building simulation with a future climate weather file, this is even going to have much worse impact on the thermal comfort of people.
Yeah. We've got a whole lot of questions coming in from the audience, and I might throw to those now, or one of them. One comes from Anna, thanking you all for the information you've presented already, but asking, what would it look like if our cities manage the urban forest as critical infrastructure? What actually needs to change to achieve this? And I think I'll go to you first, Jo, but I'm sure the others, Candice and Priya, you also have something to add there. What needs to change?
Wow, that's a great question. I think for me, it's about an awareness and a prioritisation across a whole range of urban disciplines and decision-making functions. So that comes in building design, construction, protecting trees that are already there in really sensible ways, bringing deep soil zones for new plantings in new construction as part of the design process. People often say to me, it's the problem with urban trees is densification, where, building new buildings and all the trees are getting removed. That's not the problem. The problem is poor design, right? So that's a really good example. Planning legislation, that's an area that's very much, close to my heart and my research, how we develop a strategic and statutory planning system that prioritises the things we need and protects the things we need. There's a lot of opportunity to better integrate trees as infrastructure, vegetation as infrastructure in that process. And then in the management of our spaces, we have experts, our city is full of experts in resolving complex tensions and interactions between different bits of stuff that we need in our city, the pipes and the wires and the buildings. It's not beyond us to integrate and protect trees in that scenario. It just needs to be on the table, prioritised as something we need to achieve. And we can see best practice examples in Australia and around the world where that's done in isolation. It needs to be done. It needs to become the norm in terms of the way we manage and redevelop our cities.
Yeah, Candice, do you have thoughts? What needs to change?
I actually completely agree with Jo. I would echo exactly what he said in terms of, there's different mechanisms or levers in place that we can use. Planning is, statutory planning and regulatory planning is definitely one, and it's something that we are exploring through some planning provisions at the City of Melbourne. And I suppose a lot of it is about design, is about the amount of green coverage that is included in the design of buildings and spaces, and then also internally. Jo touched on in terms of asset management and being viewed as critical assets in infrastructure. And I think that's a really fantastic point because we know that nature-based solutions, and it's not just about heat, that's other climate impacts as well in terms of flooding, water security and capturing stormwater and alternative water sources, as well as water quality. So nature-based solutions, provide multiple benefits, and at the City of Melbourne, including greening and urban forest and biodiversity as a part of our asset management strategy and plans, and how we embed that into our whole of life cycle asset management processes, from both the design, maintenance, renewal phase, all the phases. If we can embed that into that thinking around how we design and manage green and blue infrastructure, that goes a long way to, I think, integrating and reshaping how we actually view it, and the importance of it. And we know that our community highly values green space and our green assets, our natural assets. And so having that, I suppose, support and mandate from them, is something that they really value, is another piece of the puzzle too.
Yeah, I love them talking in colours. So we've got green infrastructure, we've got blue infrastructure in the water. There's people asking questions about, I don't know if you call it white infrastructure, but Priya, one for you is the difference that it can make to paint roof lines, paint roofs white. So here we go, we've got white infrastructure. How big a difference does that make to the urban heat in our cities?
That's very interesting because it's one of the cheapest mitigation adaptive actions. It doesn't really cost, maybe just compared to a normal paint and a cool paint or a white paint, it's absolutely no cost. And so the studies show that the temperature inside can reduce up to 10 degrees Celsius depending on where you are. And also you think about the double benefit that is also going to reduce the temperature outside because it is going to reflect and then cool it faster. And it's quite interesting. I don't know if you have if you have read about the New South Wales government is actually the planning minister has announced they are going to ban the dark color roof, and that's among many other solutions. This is one of the cheapest option, and then if you can implement that for the whole city, it is going to really benefit for the whole city in terms of reducing the heat island. And it was quite interesting. Like I was back in India this summer, and it was coming from a very tropical place and very very hot. And then I was thinking, well, the upstairs can we just use a cool paint? But unfortunately, the only color available for the roof was just white for residential buildings, and I could not really, convince my family to have a white paint for normally a reddish color tile roof. So that's one of the most important. Same way you can if you color the light color for the walls, it's not going to have that kind of an impact. But same, if you want to keep the same color, you can have a normal blue and a cool blue. You won't really notice the difference in the colors. A normal black and a cool black. Just having these infrared kind of materials. And there's a lot of study, particularly in New South Wales, which is looking at these highly reflective coating materials. UNSW doing highly reflective materials. It can even reduce the temperature up to 6 degrees Celsius, even in the climate like Saudi Arabia.
There's so many good questions coming through. You can head to sly.do and type in hashtag Urban Heat Islands if you want to ask your question. And thanks to Ruth for that one on white roofs. But another question from Mark is around how easy it is to retrofit CBD offices and other buildings to have roof gardens or otherwise mitigate heat impacts. And that's quite an interesting one, I think, because it's not just office buildings. We also have a lot of residential towers in the city of Melbourne these days. And I was doing an imagination thinking, would we have built cities the way they are, knowing that we would exacerbate urban heat in the way we have? I mean, I wonder if you could speak to that, Candice. Like, in some ways, have we created this problem, but how easy now, or is it possible to retrofit on office buildings?
Yeah, it's a really good question because it's that retrofitting issue is something that in the city of Melbourne we deal with a lot. It's very constrained urban setting, built up already, and we don't have necessarily, like, say, greenfield sites. We are going in and retrofitting existing spaces. So our open space and green infrastructure team have actually done some fantastic work researching in this space in terms of rooftops and being able to retrofit rooftops to create green roofs, and looking at, because load capacity is obviously a key consideration, and so looking at what buildings could actually hold a green roof and whether it's an intensive or extensive, so a shallow one compared to a deeper green roof. And so, yeah, they've done research looking at the buildings across the city, and that's actually, if anyone's interested in the rooftop project, you can look it up on our website. So they've done an assessment, but I suppose now they're sort of looking at that next step of creating demonstration sites. So really demonstrating to the industry what's possible in terms of retrofitting a green roof. And so I've partnered with DELWP, so with the state government, to develop a Green Hour rooftop, a demonstration site to show the development industry what can be done in terms of turning an existing roof into a green open space. And so, I mean, there's lots of different considerations that need to be taken into account, because it's not just about, obviously, the load capacity, but then thinking about the type of vegetation and the design of the roof space, water, and how you actually maintain the rooftop. That's another important factor when it comes to green infrastructure. So not just roofs, but walls and facades as well, how you maintain them. We're starting to do more research in that space. I suppose it's sort of similar to how we did Council House 2, which has a green roof. demonstrating what's possible and sharing those learnings and insights with the industry to then hopefully increase uptake in the private realm.
Yeah, did you want to add anything there, Priya? Or we have more questions we can go to as well, but did you have any thoughts around the retrofitting of office buildings?
We use the green roof for reduction on energy, and then the debate is around, okay, you have a 10-story building, and what are you going to actually reduce? The cooling load is just one story of the 10-story, and you could just change your light bulbs, with much less amount of money. But it's the impact on retaining the storm water, and then overall causing the social benefit along with the reduction of urban heat island, which is so you need to do like a feasibility study of what are the direct as well as the indirect benefits, and how are you going to actually maintain that. And I think I read about a research which actually looked at how many buildings can be retrofitted, but probably, I think the study shows that 50 or 60% can be retrofitted, but it's again, how do you actually maximize that benefit of retrofitting and then have those social events and social activities and those spaces for people to talk. So it's like a multifaceted benefit, not just the urban heat island benefit for green roofs, I would say.
This is why it's an area of expertise, isn't it? And there's so many factors in play. An interesting question here around data. Asking what methods can we use to study urban heat island and the potential for mitigation interventions in places with low data availability. I don't know, you've studied all across the country there, Joe. I mean, what can we do when we don't have much data available at all to guide decision making?
Well, there's a lot of research in this space. There's a lot of activity now from various levels of government and the private sector. And increasingly, we can get remote sense data for pretty much any areas of the world, really, to provide useful information about urban heat island. If you want to get really sophisticated, though, you need to get to the level of Candice and Priya with actual sensors in the environment. So we can learn a lot through remote sensing techniques, and a lot of our citywide studies, for example, are all done using remotely sensed data on urban heat. But when we want to get down to that sort of site-specific and the real human experience of indoor and outdoor environments, that's where we really need to get to those sensors in place to understand the complex dynamics of temperature and climate at that local level and get really well-tailored responses. So it's possible anywhere really now. It's just about the quality of the data that you're going to be able to access.
Yeah, any thoughts, Priya or Candice? I can sort of smash two questions together here, actually. Priya, you're still plugged in. I mean, there's a point around, solutions for some of this being in building codes. And we do have an update to the National Construction Code coming. The kind of data that you rely on as a building scientist, is that the kind of data that we might see incorporated into something like the building code, or who's actually using the data to make changes or shift the way that we're adapting to urban heat island or mitigating for it?
Yeah. Just to add on to what Joe said before, the data availability. It's those sensors to measure, ranging from the high-end Bureau of Meteorology sensors and coming to the low-cost sensors. They differ significantly in terms of quality and quality of data and the cost of data. But there are a lot of crowdsourcing available these days, where somebody can just buy, for a couple of $100 and put it in their backyard. And also from our Citizen Science Project, we have developed this local sensor, which can be used with a mobile app. But the most important thing is you understand the limitation of the data. When you compare your data with the Bureau of Meteorology, always understand there could be an uncertainty or an error band of plus or minus 2 degrees Celsius. And for the Australian Building Code, that's really good that we have actually gone to the 7-star. We will be going to the 7-star mandatory for 2022 onwards, and there is a good balance of heating and cooling load in that, and that's all based on the prediction of how the future weather files like from 2030 or 2050, how is the impact going to be on the heat, particularly on the thermal comfort, how many hours of discomfort are going to be there. So this data is mainly used in building discipline, but if you have data which can represent the health, like how many people actually get sick, how is the core body temperature actually going to be increased during the hot days. So you have different layers of data, and the most challenging thing is actually to bring them all together so that everybody can actually use this data. I mean, as I said, most of the data on health in Australia, health and heat is okay, how many people are hospitalized on a hot day? What is the temperature? But there are, if you could go a bit more deeper to really understand, what are these people actually hospitalized for? What could be the mitigation? Can they just put their put a cold cloth around their body to save them from this temperature or high heat. So it's basically about, there is data everywhere. Everybody is collecting data, but the challenge is, how do you interpret the data and bring those layers of data together, and so that everybody learn from it and then make it openly available for people. And when they do, the citizens or lay people do their measurement, they can actually compare and understand the limitation of, okay, this data is good but not perfect, but at least this is going to tell me something about my microclimate, and I can actually compare my area temperature of this local climate to an undisturbed Bureau of Meteorology data, and my location is actually 3 degrees Celsius higher than the Bureau of Meteorology data. So that understanding of that layers of data is very important.
It'd be great to hear about some of that collaboration that's happening. Candice, you have the data sets available for use. How does the collaboration work between local government and the private realm and other levels of government?
Yeah, so I suppose in this sort of space, we're really fortunate to have good relationships with the universities. So the fact that RMIT and then the University of Melbourne are both hosted, or both live campuses are in the city, means that we're able to connect and potentially partner on different research projects. And something that's been really fantastic initiative between 3 organisations is the Melbourne Innovation District up in City North in Carlton, and that's provided a test bed for us to go in and trial some of these sensors, and then share the data with different researchers and students who might want to use it to inform projects, inform students that are studying architecture and design, and use it to inform projects on how they design public open space and what sort of interventions could be put in place. So I suppose that's very sort of high level sort of collaboration, but I think that as we start to collect more data, more localized data, this is the sort of avenue that we can pursue more to really go into place. So sort of like Joe was talking about in terms of that more localized context and data that we're capturing in particular places, because built form and character is very different across the city from, obviously CBD is very different to somewhere like Carlton or Kensington. And being able to partner with universities and students to, run challenges, design challenges and things like that, and use this data to inform those types of projects is a fantastic way for students to learn, but also then for us to gain insights about what could be done in place as well. So I haven't got too specific there, but they're the sort of ways that we collaborate with the unis in particular. And then, the idea of sharing data with private realm and industry, again, hoping that it's the sort of thing that they can learn from. We're trying to, I suppose, implement innovative projects keeping in mind that they can learn from that, and then hopefully we see that replicated in the private realm as well.
Yeah, Bob's asking, with regards to, I think this is close to your heart, Joe, does anyone have any comments about the impact of species choice? Like trees have different canopies, root forms, affecting shading, but also power lines and paving. And I think I'm not the only one that is sometimes amazed at the shapes that trees are cut into in order to fit around infrastructure like power lines. I mean, I'd be interested in your thoughts about this with regards to the urban canopy, Joe, particularly if we are getting more warming. Are the kinds of trees that we're choosing now the ones for the future? If you could speak to that, that would be fantastic.
Sure, Kalia. Look, it's not my area of expertise. I'm more in urban planning, urban sustainability, but I do work with fantastic tree people, as I call them, who really do have that knowledge around species, suitability for a whole range of factors, so where they're going to be planted, how they're going to be used, but also those climate factors. Some great research as part of the Clean Air and Urban Landscape Hub that we ran for about 6 years, just finished up, looking at species adaptability to climate scenarios. That was led by Dave Kendall, who's now at UTAS, looking at a whole range of different species from around the country, where they thrive, where they struggle in different temperature bands, which is now being used by local government, I think City of Melbourne as well, to inform their street tree planting and park planting programs, making sure that the trees that we are planting now are going to be robust and resilient to different climate scenarios in the future. So there's that climate pressure. But then your point about the cutting of trees around infrastructure, I think that's where I guess we can see a good effort being made to resolve a conflict that could have been avoided by a better approach in the first place. And this is my call to seeing the tree as part of critical infrastructure, not putting it in the ground and then being surprised that it grows and we've got a problem we've got to now deal with, but understanding how we better integrate trees and then the right species of tree, which again, not my specific expertise, but certainly that is really important, so that the conflicts with underground infrastructure, above ground infrastructure are minimised and best managed over the life of all those different types of infrastructure, including the tree.
Here for that. I take photos of the kind of amazing forms that they cut trees into, actually. It's so fascinating. And I think, it'd be good to hear a little bit more about the balance that you're speaking about, particularly as it relates to public and private realms. I mean, that's come up a bit in this conversation already, how we manage the urban canopy across both. What are the sort of trends you're seeing across the country, Joe, in this space?
Well, look, this is my high horse. So excuse me, I'll get on it for 30 seconds, and Candice might want to chime in as well. There has been really fantastic action across the country in urban LGAs, local governments, often under-resourced, doing great things to try and create new urban canopy, arrest decline. But it's almost all on the public realm, except for a few leading councils who are trying to see how they can have more influence in the private realm. When we think about the leafiest areas, particularly of a city like Melbourne, the eastern suburbs, the majority of that vegetation is in the private realm. So if we ignore that and we ignore the reduction that's happening there, which is over year by year, it's gradually being eroded, where we've got our heads in the sand. So knowing how much the private realm contributes, and then thinking about the levers, as Candice said, and a lot of that's actually about engaging with community like we are today, and getting people to understand that their tree in their backyard is part of a collective infrastructure that they are contributing to and they are benefiting from, is really, really important. And then on the other side, the new areas of our cities where we're building new suburbs, we're not building suburbs with the private realm, the contribution of private realm vegetation well thought through and delivered. We're building suburbs that are relying almost entirely on the public realm to deliver vegetation and all the benefits that brings. So it's not just cooling, but that's what we're talking about today. And there's just not enough space. When we look at the roads and the crossovers and the wires and all the other things, there's not enough space, and we've got to do that better.
I'd welcome your thoughts, Priya, Candice. On that.
I think this is one of the main challenges, I would say, that we definitely face in this space, that private realm greening. And so, for example, in the City of Melbourne, the split between public and private realm is about 25% public, 75% private. So we're very limited in terms of what we can control ourselves. And I think we have approximately around 76,000 trees in the City of Melbourne that our urban forest team manages, which is a lot, but there is a big gap in the private realm. And I suppose there's a few issues associated with that, which Joe's touched on. So there's vegetation removal. We have a lot of major projects that occur in the city, infrastructure and transport projects. And so we do see major losses of vegetation with that. And so we have mechanisms in place, certain tree protection regulations, or we also have, I'm not a planner, but in general terms, developer contributions. So, we can place a dollar value on a tree and get compensation if we are losing good quality vegetation. We can feed that back into planting and so on. But we also like to see developers do their best to protect what is existing, especially if it is a significant tree that's located on site. Some other initiatives that we've got in place, such as the Urban Forest Fund, which is a funding program. So it's a 50-50 matched funding program where we work with private developers to increase greening on site. And so, for example, we've got some projects in Kensington, some community gardens. We've got the new Sky Farm, which has just launched last year. It's a rooftop urban farm down along the waterfront, if anyone's interested, down Seafarers Way. So encouraging, it's I suppose a way of encouraging increased greening in the private realm. And then there's also those planning levers, planning policy provisions and levers that we can use to try and increase greening on private development. And then, I talked about demonstration projects we do as well. So trying to, I suppose, upskill the industry and provide them with the right information and examples to see them implement similar solutions. So there's a few different levers in place, but it's one of those constant challenges that we have trying to limit the impact that private development can have on our city, especially in for all climate change impacts. Flooding and stormwater is another big issue as well, impermeability. So it's all part of I suppose a bigger story in terms of the impact it has.
So many great thoughts, Priya. I'd love to hear your ideas. They're on the private public quickly. Yeah,
I just one point about the increasing tendency of people using artificial grasses to replace the natural grass, and our citizen science experiments. People were so shocked to see the artificial grass can be up to 75 degrees Celsius hot surface temperature measured on a hot day compared to a natural grass which could be 30 to 40 degrees. And that's really each of them having the artificial grass for easy maintenance, that is all contributing to the urban heat island in the municipality or in the neighborhood. Yeah, that's it.
I did not know that. The benefit of not mowing maybe is not paying off with regards to urban heating. No. Look, I think we're almost out of time, but I just love the shortest comment from each of you about where you see the hope. What are you excited about in this space of urban heat island? What from your areas, what are you excited about?
I'll go quickly first.
Go, Drew.
Local government action. Candice leading the way at Melbourne, City of Melbourne, but all local governments around Australia, limited resources, urban forests, strategic planners, sustainability officers, just working so hard to try and bring that data, information, community, political leaders along to get action on the ground. That's where I see hope.
Candice?
Yeah, I think something that I'm excited about is it's a topic that Joe's covered about seeing nature-based solutions is critical infrastructure, and I think that we're starting to see that more and more, that it's starting to get that recognition as it's an asset like our roads and drainage and so on. And I think that's a really important part of increasing greening or green-blue infrastructure. And so I think that's a space that I'm excited to start to see kick off a bit more, I think.
And Priya?
Yeah. So for me, it is the interdisciplinary collaboration which is happening a lot these days. I mean, 10 years ago, it used to be just a building science problem or a landscape architecture problem, and now it is becoming more like a health problem, and then there is social science problem, because you really need all these disciplines to work together. And so I'm very excited about the conference which is going to happen next year. This is going to be a good platform for people to come from different disciplines.
Thank you so much, all three, Jo, Candace, Priya. Thanks for being part of this conversation. I've absolutely found everything you've had to say fascinating and important, and it's great the conference is coming our way to find out more. Thanks so much for joining us for this Melbourne Conversations event. We're out of time. City of Melbourne runs these events on the third Wednesday of every month, though, so you can tune in again, and you can see the details of future events by searching Melbourne Conversations on the City of Melbourne website. Don't forget to subscribe to this Melbourne Knowledge Week YouTube channel to stay up to date for the upcoming events. And there's also a link in the YouTube chat to a survey. The City of Melbourne team would love to hear your thoughts on this event and others. Thanks to everybody for participating. Thanks for your questions. And my name's Kalia Colston. It's been fun. Thanks for the support from the City of Melbourne team, and see you next time. Bye.